Ask any leader if they value collaboration. You'll get a resounding yes. Today we're going to talk about how to get higher levels of collaboration from any team using an effective framework from someone who's made it happen. Welcome to the Remarkable Leadership Podcast. Are you ready? Let's go.
Welcome to the Remarkable Leadership Podcast. We are here each week to help you lead more confidently and make a bigger difference, both professionally and personally. This episode is sponsored by From Manager to Remarkable Leader, Kevin's flagship workshop based on his proven leadership model. Learn more at remarkablepodcast.com/manager. And now here's your host, Kevin.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of the Remarkable Leadership Podcast. The word of the day is collaboration. Makes me think of password in the old days. Word is collaboration. Let me introduce our guest, and we'll talk about why we get to collaboration here in just a second. My guest's name today, and if you're watching, you can see his smiling face. His name is Carlos Valdes-Dapena. And he is a keynote speaker, author, organizational development professional with over 30 years of experience supporting global corporations, including Mars and IBM. He has written 2 books on teamwork. Get them both up here. Lessons from Mars, How One Global Company Cracked the Code on High-Performance Collaboration and Teamwork, and Virtual Teams, Holding the Center When You Can't Meet Face-to-Face. Both books are based on original research he conducted during his 17 years as an internal consultant at Mars, where he worked with iconic brands such as M&Ms. I see an M&M in the background, Snickers, and Wrigley's gum. Carlos has presented and offered workshops at numerous conferences. He's also a guest lecturer at American University and George Mason University. In addition to his speaking and writing, he is the managing principal of Corporate Collaboration Resources, an organization and group effectiveness consulting firm specializing in creating and sustaining cultures of collaboration. There's that word. He lives with his wife in West Orange, New Jersey, where he has a grand baby nearby. So we might even hear 2 nearby. But we might, in the house, we might actually hear them before we're done. You never know. Anything's possible. Carlos, welcome. I'm glad that you're here.
Thank you. Oh, thank you for the invitation. Delighted to be with you.
So I often ask people this question, and people that watch or listen all the time might actually get tired of me asking this the way I do. But you didn't wake up when you were 5 years old and say, I want to be an organizational development consultant.
Oh, heck no.
Yeah. So tell us about the journey that ended you up here. Quick synopsis of the path that led you to doing the work that you're doing.
The path is, what's that? There's a country song called the Broken Road. Broken Road, I think it's called. And it's been a broken road in all the good ways. I have been a member of 3 different unions in my life. I've been a taxi driver, a hotel bellman. The list goes on. Worked in the professional photography industry for a while. I was working in the theater professionally for a while. I have a master's degree in theater as well as one in organization development. I stumbled into a small growing firm in the 1980s, a stock photography firm. It's now an industry that's huge on the internet. Internet wouldn't be what it is without stock photography. Back then, it was an industry being birthed, and I worked for a guy who was one of the founding fathers of the industry, actually, a guy named Henry Scanlon. I spent 9 years at that company learning about how businesses work, how people within businesses work, and found I had this capability to understand how the gears of the organizational machinery were turning. I was able to help address some issues. I developed some training. I didn't know there was an industry devoted to corporate training, so I thought I was making it up back in the day.
Well, you were. When you don't know, you are making it.
There you go. So I spent 9 wonderful years there. Then when I realized there's a whole industry out there that focuses on organizational health, I like to think of it as, and human capability, I got hired by DDI, Development Dimensions International, out of Bridgeville, Pennsylvania, to do training. And that developed into consulting. And then from there, I got hired by IBM to be an internal executive coach supporting a subset of their top 35 global leaders, which was just a breakthrough for me. While I was there, I got my second master's degree at American University in org development, and there you go. Then suddenly I'm legit, and I got hired by Mars in around 2000. Legit. Not too legit. That's it, baby.
Well, thanks for that sort of synopsis. I think it's helpful. It helps people. It helps all of us understand where you're coming from and a little bit more about who you are. And I think that one of the reasons I always ask that question, Carlos, is that when people are listening or watching, I think often, I mean, listen, I get smart people here. And so like, how did they get there? And I think a lot of people have, to your phrase, a broken road. And maybe it's a bit inspirational for folks just to hear that, maybe I don't have it quite figured out yet. Doesn't mean you won't. Doesn't mean you can't find your way to the right place.
I'll cap it off by saying, I don't think I found my passion, even within my field, until I was in my don't want to give my age away here, but in my mid-50s. I finally sort of said, this whole collaboration thing, this has got me. And I think I really hit my stride relatively late in my professional career, even after having found my specialty.
There you go. So you're at Mars for 17 years, and you became focused really on teams, collaboration, that sort of thing. So I know that you can't encapsulate the question I'm going to answer in 3 minutes, but what did you learn about collaboration? There's a lot that's been studied and learned about, and I know that you and I are both aware of a lot of the same models, and you and I, as it turns out, have come to some of the same conclusions. What did you learn about how teams really work and collaborate by watching them and helping them?
I learned 2 or 3 things. The first thing I learned was the conventional approach to making teams better just wasn't making teams better. Conventional understandings developed from some very smart people in the 60s and 50s, coming largely out of work that was done with the military, it turns out, with leadership development and team development. They made some really important discoveries, but the way we've translated those into corporate America, corporate world, just wasn't helping teams perform better. And we were spending a lot of money on this, and it just wasn't changing outcomes, which is really what I'm interested in doing. So that was lesson 1. The conventional stuff just didn't seem to take. And I'm not sure why.
Let's just stop there for a second, because I think you're talking about something that you and I both thought, which is forming, storming, norming. Bruce Tuckman, right? Forming, storming, norming, performing. And here's the thing. It's true. But to your point, it's more diagnostic than anything else, and it's not really helpful. Okay, now what?
Right. So what do we do? Exactly. The so what of it was never clear. And some of the good research on it, and one of the reasons I hang out with university people is because they're always giving me the latest inside skinny. Some early research, not early, but research in the 80s and 90s coming out of Yale, a guy named one of my heroes. I can't remember his name, but I'll pass on it. Basically, he realized one of his students, Janet Gersick, said, you know what? Maybe there are 2 stages, but after that, teams are so unique, they kind of go wherever they go. Some go back to stage 1, some go to stage 5, because there also is a 5th stage called adjourning. She said it varies a lot. Now, apparently that research, they haven't been able to replicate her research in later work, but that she's not the only one who got this feeling like you and I, that there's something that wasn't really helpful about it, right? So yeah, it was a big aha. That's okay. It's a big aha. So lesson 1 is and I'd been relying on that, right? That's what I learned in grad school. So I had to say, okay, that's a problem. What am I going to do now? And while I was at IBM, I had made a study along with the rest of my colleagues there of motivation. They used a particular model from a guy named David McClelland, around motivation as the foundation for executive coaching, again, which is what I was doing. And as I was digging through my data from Mars, what I recognized was a pattern I'd seen at IBM, which is these people who are super high in the achievement drive, one of McClelland's 3 big ones, tend to be less motivated to collaborate. And Mars, like a lot of companies, hires results-oriented, achievement-driven people. And no wonder they weren't getting collaboration, because those people loved doing what they did. They were good at it. They were getting good business results. we could talk team all we wanted and put up all the posters on the wall that we could make room for, but it wasn't changing behavior. It wasn't getting the kind of collaboration that in an increasingly complex environment, the business needed, right? Both within teams and across functions. So
you got these smart people that all acknowledge, oh yeah, the team, yeah.
yeah, everybody gets it,
yeah.
Right? So that discovery, then we asked ourselves, the team I was working with at the time said, so if that's the problem, and bear in mind, that's a different problem from one of the primary problems people identify, which is trust, which is not to say trust isn't important. It's hugely important. But everybody else is over here working on doing things to make people trust each other. And in fact, it almost didn't matter because they weren't motivated to collaborate. So we had to say, what do we do to get people motivated to collaborate? And that was lesson 3, that you can actually turn people's achievement drive towards collaboration if you frame it the right way. And that would be lesson 3.
Yeah, I got to get the purpose and get alignment and get that figured out, right? So you created a framework that you take us through in the book Lessons from Mars in some great detail. But talk briefly.
A lot of detail.
But what I'd like you to do is to give us a synopsis of that, and then I want to dive into all the practical aspects for all of us as leaders and teammates, because you're both by definition. So quickly tell us about the framework, if you would.
Okay.
Maybe the best thing to do, really, Carlos, is to highlight 2 or 3 pieces of it that you think would be most helpful.
Yeah, so let's start with the basics, and it's what I really focus on in the second book. So before the framework, there were these what we call 3 imperatives. Our diagnosis told us people were not intentional about collaboration. They had it in their heads, they had the spirit, but they didn't have the intention in really doing. So we needed to foster intentionality of collaboration. To do that, people needed greater clarity about why collaboration actually mattered, how it would feed their own drive to achieve. Super important, and not just in a generic way, but what was the specific work that actually required collaboration so they could focus on that, and then also have the concomitant freedom to not collaborate on stuff, because you don't need to collaborate on everything. And one of the mistakes we make is we talk team about everything. Let's just collaborate where it's essential and where it will create added value. And then let's let great individuals do what they do as great individuals and with the appropriate level of coordination. Finding that balance, right? That's the clarity that I think is so important. So to get that, and you've already touched on this, Kevin, is first, what's the role the team plays in the organization? Not just functionally, right? But what's the value our team as a group is expected to deliver in line with the strategy, vision, mission? Then how will we as a team do that? What is our team purpose? What is our collaborative reason for being? It's not just to do work. So for example, what I like to say is your collaboration is going to talk, your purpose will describe how your work as a team is greater than just the sum of your individual efforts. There is some, I hate to use the word magic, but something harder to define that results from the way you come together as a group, right? And the way your shared efforts and intent create something over and above just everybody hitting their individual goals. And this is what our team purpose tries to capture. But that's what that then connects to that achievement drive, right? People go, oh, I get it. Now, if I work on that and in this way, it's going to satisfy that deep need that McClellan talks about of achieving. And by the way, he's not the only one. There are others who say that one of the foundational drives of engagement is I need to feel like I'm contributing. And
I want to be doing meaningful work. And if I define the work as my work, it's different than if I define my job as being my work plus the team's work, right?
Yeah, and if we find that sweet spot where those things intersect, you can take that achievement motive and you can point it right at collaboration, and it's amazing some of the results we saw.
So you said something in passing a second ago, and it caused me to write it down. You used the word coordination.
Yeah.
And my immediate thought, and it's only a thought, this is the danger of thinking out loud, is that a lot of people practice coordination and call it collaboration.
Yes.
Agree, disagree, is that where you're going at
Absolutely
all?
agree. In fact, in the book, you'll have seen this. I have this thing I call the levels of collaboration. So I should open the book and look at it because I can't remember the words, but there's this low level of, I call it cooperation, CO-operation, where we're in the same office back in the old days or in the same virtual space at the same time. We're all doing our stuff, but it's just we're operating in sync, but not necessarily together, right? So we're doing our stuff. We report to the same person. We're in the same department, but all we're doing is operating in the same place at the same time. Just a notch above that is what I call coordination, which is you're working on something and I'm working on something, and we happen to be standing over at the coffee machine, virtual or real, and we're just having a chat. It's a casual chat about the work and what's getting in our way and what we're excited about. And you say something about a project you're doing. I go, wow, that's really interesting because I'm working on this other thing over here that's related to that. Let's make sure we stay connected about that. And if we're sharp, we will, and too often we don't. We get into some other problems. But that's coordination to my way of thinking. Sometimes the boss facilitates it, right? Sometimes we do it with each other. And in the ideal world, we're doing it with each other. It is a lower level, lower energy form of collaboration. It's important. It has to be done. But it doesn't require the same set of techniques and skills that intentional or proactive collaboration requires.
It's a very low bar, but I think that's where a lot of people stop. And I guess that's the
It
point
is.
that I was trying to
Right.
make, right?
Right. And it's
So,
where a lot of the complaints come from. We're not communicating with each other is really a thing that says we haven't figured out how to coordinate appropriately across our silos.
right. So, you've spent a lot of time looking at teams, watching teams, coaching teams, observing
Mm.
teams. Of the things that you've said, intentionality, clarity, purpose, which of those components would you say teams are most challenged by? Or is there one of those? All of them are important, of course. Is there one of them that perhaps you see more frequently than the others as being the biggest gap or the biggest impediment?
Yeah, it has to be purpose. And I think, and Kevin, to be honest, I'm still looking for the perfect way to set up the ideal conversation with the team about their shared collaborative purpose. I was talking to a client the other day, and she knows my work well. She happens to work in one part of Mars, and she'd been through a couple of sessions using this framework we developed, led by the team leader, which is one of the things I happen to like about this framework is you don't need a fancy consultant like me to make it work. And she was really frustrated. She said, the team I'm on now, Carlos, I know we need a team purpose, but I don't want to do it because frankly, it's always fluffy. It's always sort of fluffy and aspirational and lovely, but it doesn't really help our work any. And I said to her, that's unfortunate because a strong team purpose is actually quite pragmatic. It's quite pragmatic. It will literally tell you in a sentence what's the kind of work we should be focused on together and what sorts of work should we leave for individuals to do. If it isn't that clear, that doesn't mean it has to be boring, right? I know some really powerful ones that are both aspirational and pragmatic at the same time. It's a difficult, it is, as we say, it was what I used the word sweet spot earlier, right? It's a
Right.
sweet spot that can be hard to find, but if you have the right conversations, and I've come up with a couple of techniques that work pretty well, you can get there. And that then becomes this really useful tool for deciding what work goes in what bucket.
So
Right.
inside of your framework, I'm just going to pick out a piece that I thought might be worth chatting about a little bit. You use a phrase which I love, but most people don't use that phrase. People use other phrases. You talk about ways of working.
Yep.
So talk about ways of working, because the reason I like the phrase is that I think it's less consultancy, right? So so just talk about what you mean by that and why that matters to a team, and as a leader, how we can help with that one specifically.
So I have to give credit to the source of that term. I learned it at Mars Incorporated. Mars Incorporated, if people don't know, is a privately held firm, global, worth I don't know how many billions of dollars, probably 50 plus billion now, in the confectionery space, which a lot of people know, M&Ms and Snickers. Then also in the pet care division is huge, pet care with a lot of veterinary hospitals, and then a smaller food business. But it's a very pragmatic organization. It's a very grounded, you don't need a fancy MBA to rise to the top. It's kind of what I call a bootstrap organization. If you can pull yourself up by your bootstraps, you can succeed there. And that was a term that was in common parlance when I worked there. I was more, I would have used, as consultant that I am, I would have talked about team processes, right? And one thing Martians hate is process. Now, not all Martians, I want to apologize to those Martians who are process geeks, but Mars is a very much relationship-driven company. We got stuff done through how we worked with others, our ways of working with others. Process was often seen as restrictive and limiting, and we wanted to be able to vamp and do what we needed to do in the moment. It speaks to a kind of agility, actually. Anyway, so I learned it at Mars, and when I was developing the framework with my colleagues, we wanted the framework to resonate with the Mars culture, and so that's
They
the
were
term.
your customer after all.
They were our customer. Yeah, well, that's who we were trying to make happy, and we were teaching. We embedded it in one of our management development programs, and so that was why we chose it. And it does. I love it for that reason. That it doesn't sound consultancy. It literally is. How are we going to get stuff done as a group? What are our ways of working together efficiently and effectively to get stuff done? And so it was just a good fit, and I've carried it with me ever since. I will get some grief from people sometimes for it because they don't.
Well,
They
not
think
from
it
me,
sounds odd, but
right? Well, but it's. I mean, so I'll just say this. So whatever words you use in your organization, whether agreements, uh, process, boundaries,
norms.
norms,
Mhm.
expectations, whatever that is,
Yeah.
it's this idea of we can't leave that part out of this process in terms of how are we going to get more effective teamwork, more effective collaboration when collaboration is required. Which is the other thing that you just mentioned earlier that I want to go back and highlight for people is I'm doing this live, everybody, but everyone else you can go back and re-listen. But this idea of what's the purpose, what's the stuff that we need to collaborate on, and what's the stuff that individuals can do. And you talked about that. You talk about that a lot in the book. And I want to use that as a way to get to the world we live in today. As we are talking in the middle of February of 2021, and everyone is largely, or many people, of course, are still working remotely. So our experience is that the longer people work remotely, the more they move to the individual side of that.
Yes.
Right? The more insular they become, the more personal
Mhm.
silos grow. So what's been your experience in the last 12 months about how remote work is impacting collaboration?
The same, only more so. So this individual achievement drive, very much to the point you're making, and I read an article just last week about a senior tech person saying, you know what, we're losing the connectivity that makes us great, that makes our culture strong. And I see a lot of that. And the mistake many teams made, and many have adjusted since in the past several months, but one of the initial mistakes groups made was, let's just translate what we do in the office to a virtual environment. I had one long-term client I've been working with for a while. They had a certain way of a certain meeting cadence that they had when they were working in the office, and they were already somewhat remote and detached because it was a global team. But a number of them sat in the same office, and they had the technology around them, and they were sitting in the culture, so they would meet every week for an hour to go over their stuff. It turns out in a virtual environment, it's just too much. We've all heard about Zoom fatigue, right? The fatigue we get from this two-dimensional experience where we can't pick up on the energy of the person as we did. But this meeting every week where they would cram it full of anything and everything just to honor a pattern of meeting that had been appropriate before. They have since realized that their ways of working had to be adapted to not just their work, which is the key to ways of working, right? What is our purpose? What's the shared work? Then what should our meetings look like? Now that we have to do this virtually, how can we think more about energy management? I've heard somebody refer to it recently as. You have to think a lot about that because it can be really, really draining for people to do these long days with strings of virtual meetings, one after the other. And so think about energy management all the time, because it is draining. Not everybody. Some people are doing fine, but others are having a harder time, and we have to be very mindful of it.
So you mentioned your client saying, and it could be pretty much anyone who's listening could probably have said as well, hey, we're losing the connection between each other. So what advice do you have if people were nodding with you when you said that? Like, what are you suggesting to people? Okay, here we are, right? 11 months at this moment, 11 months in. What are your recommendations for teams, for individuals, to help keep those connections strong in this world?
My bias, and I will admit this right up front, and it's all throughout the book, is that the most powerful connections we build are through the work we do together. So the connections we might build back in the day when we could be face to face, going out on a ropes course together, or doing an escape room exercise together, that's lovely, and it greases the wheels in the social side of our work lives. But it doesn't build connection as much as, you used this word before that I absolutely love, meaningful, as doing meaningful work together. So I encourage teams, that's why I wrote the Virtual Teams book. The foundation for that is a good, clear purpose. Why is our work together important? Why does it matter, not just to us as a team, but to us as individuals? What's meaningful for us in our work together? Emphasize that, and then say, okay, where are the few meaningful projects where, and perhaps you don't do it as a full team. It's as important to work one-to-one or in groups of 3. It's even more, I find, more powerful for people when they have, gosh, I mean, think about the times, Kevin, I'm sure you've been through this, when you pull together around something really important, possibly urgent, you get through it, it was hard work, you put in extra hours, it stretched you, and it's, the pictures you'll see is people giving each other high fives, right? It's deeper than that, right? You build a relationship with these people. You're like, do you remember the time we went through this thing together and how incredible that was, even though at times it was really awful? The high five is a shallow symbol of just how profound a relationship you can build through doing meaningful work together. So find those places, find those points of connection through the work. At the same time, yes, do some social stuff, even virtually. Those wine tastings that people are doing from time to time, you can have a few good chuckles there, and you should. But I would stress it's doing meaningful work in small groups together. And finally, being mindful about it. So what are you learning from it? How's it going? Stopping and taking stock of your progress, even your failures, and having some deeper conversations there. I think all of that will serve to build that connection that is at risk when we're working remotely.
Well, you used 2 words earlier that are 2 of my favorite words as it relates to remote, and that is intentional and proactive, right? And so being intentional. And I think the other thing I would highlight for people that you just said, Carlos, is this idea that and of course it always needs to be dictated by the work, but smaller groups can be highly effective and highly collaborative all the time, but especially when we're remote, much easier to manage that 2, 3, 4 person.
So much easier.
The 8, 10, 12 person.
Yeah. Those 11-person meetings, and I'll be on one tomorrow morning for 2 hours. It's just difficult. You're familiar with Peter Block's work, and those who know Peter Block knows that he believes the magic number is 3. Magic number is 3. If you've ever been in any of his workshops, he'll take a room of 500 people and have you form pods of 3 and ask you one of his wonderful provocative questions. And it's almost it's amazing what a small group can do, and the strength of the connections it can foster.
Yeah, so I'll just give everyone who's watching 2 anchors. You got the power of 3, and then you've got Google that says the 2 pizza rule, right? So really, what everyone who's thought about this is saying, and of course it depends on the context, but somewhere between 3 and 7, you get above 7, it's more than 2 pizzas, and you get above 7, and you got a whole nother. Well, you and I could have a whole conversation about that. We don't have time for. today.
Well, I'm almost out of time, but one last thought. Any of those meetings, and I just finished an article about this, the key to making those work is that they are, for me, meeting is about co-creation. If we aren't actively co-creating a deliverable, then let's keep it short and social. But if we're not, that, again, it comes back to the work, right? If a meeting isn't about real work, then odds are you should probably do something else.
And oh, by the way, that was true when we were together.
Oh, totally.
I mean, that's not just a virtual conversation.
Universally true. Yes.
Everyone's having all this conversation about virtual meetings. Like, you didn't like your meetings before. We just made them one step harder, but don't blame it all on Zoom.
So true. So true, Kevin.
A couple of things before we go, Carlos.
Yeah.
Number one, what do you do for fun?
Well, these days I'm baking. Like a lot of people, I've gotten into pie baking. I've always baked bread, and I've decided I was going to learn how to do a pie crust, which has been an adventure. I am a yoga instructor and a yoga practitioner, so I always get some of that into my day. And I have an old English car that I like to sweat over and spend too much money on to keep on the road.
It's not driving, it's preparing to someday drive.
Well, I drive it, but I spend way more time underneath it. But the driving is such a treat, and I come from a big family, and several of my brothers have old cars as well. And every year we'll do what we call the bro trip, and we gather for 4 or 5 days, and we just drive back roads in our funky old cars, and that's another source. And then, of course, got to say it, the grandkids.
Well, that was perfunctory, but meaningful, of course.
Gotta say, no, they're the light of my life, so can't forget them.
Perfect. So, what are you reading these days, Carlos?
I am on 3 books right now. I am reading a book by Ken Follett called The Evening and the Morning. Ken Follett and his wonderful historical fiction. That's a big fat book that I'm into. I'm reading a book called Effortless by a guy named Danny Iney, I think is how he pronounces his name, I-N-Y. And it's a book about how to grow your company if you're a small entrepreneur. And the title says it all. It's about how do you do this in a way that's works for you, that feels at the end of the day effortless. And finally, I'm working through a book, which the Effortless one as well. It's more of a workbook on grief recovery. I'm dealing with a loss in my life, and I know I'm not quite getting there, so I've partnered with a friend, and we're working through this book on grief recovery.
And the book is called?
It's called The Grief Recovery Handbook. It was recommended by a men's group I'm part of. So, yeah, I like to keep a couple of balls in the air in terms of the books.
We will have all of those things in the show notes, everybody. If you didn't know that, you can always find them there. And now the question, Carlos, you'd most like me to ask, where can we learn more about you and your work? Where do you want to point people?
My website is carlosvdapena.com. And there you can find links to my books, to the various podcasts I've been on, the podcasts I've done, and the many articles I've been fortunate enough to be able to get out there in the last couple of years. So that would be the central source. I am on LinkedIn. I'm pretty active on LinkedIn. Not the most, but I'm there a couple times a week, and also on Facebook. All
right. So you can find him, Carlos Dapena. Carlos. So spell it for us for people that aren't going to go to the show notes. Just do that.
All right, here we go. It's hyphenated last name, Valdes-Dapena. It's Valdes with an S, critically. V like Victor, A-L-D-E-S, hyphen Dapena. D like David, A-P-E-N-A. It's a Cuban name. My dad came from Havana.
.com with a Carlos on the front of all
that. Well, the website is just Carlos V. Dapena.
So there we go. Carlos V. Dapena. So now you got it. If you want to find him on LinkedIn, you got it. If you want to, you can always find all that in the show notes too, everybody. Before we go, I have a question for all of you. Carlos is almost done, but a question for all of you is now what? What action are you going to take from all of this? Maybe you got something very practical from our conversation near the end about what you do with your team as a remote leader or remote teammate. Maybe you got some ideas earlier in terms of collaboration in the broader sense, in terms of his overall framework. The question isn't, was this fun? The question isn't, was this interesting? The question is, what action will you take? Because when you do that, this will be far more valuable, and we know that you're more likely to come back. So Before we go, I want you all to know this episode was brought to you by our new book, The Long Distance Teammate, Staying Engaged and Connected While Working Anywhere. You can go to longdistanceteammate.com because there's a big difference between working from home and being a member of a successful remote team. And with that, Carlos, thank you for being here. It was a pleasure to have you. We finally got connected. We made it happen, and I'm really glad that we did.
And thank you for the wonderful questions and for your clear attention paid to detail and your research. Really a pleasure to speak with you.
It's my pleasure. And we'll be back next week. You all know that, right? We'll be back next week with another episode of the Remarkable Leadership Podcast. We'll see you all then.